Welcome to another episode of On the History Trail. I'm your host and tour guide, Mark Nonestied. In 1863, East Brunswick resident William Augustus Rogers was in Virginia with the Union Army fighting during the Civil War. William was the son of a sea captain, also named William, and his wife Adeline. They lived in what was the Old Bridge section of the township, where he was born in the family home in 1841. In April of 1863, he went off to fight in the Battle of Chancellorsville. He never made it back home alive. Today, a weathered marble obelisk stands at the top of Chestnut Hill Cemetery in East Brunswick to commemorate his short life. From 1861 to 1865, the American Civil War raged on, dividing our country like it had never been torn apart before, and for that matter, afterwards. There were no battles fought on New Jersey soil. However, the state did play an important role during the war. On today's episode, we are going to talk with Civil War historian Joseph Bilby about New Jersey's role during the Civil War. Mr. Bilby is the author of over 250 articles on New Jersey and military history. He is also the author of 15 books on the subject, including the editor of New Jersey Goes to War and New Jersey's Civil War Odyssey. Mr. Bilby has appeared on both the History Channel and the Discovery Channel, and recently received an award of recognition from the New Jersey Historical Commission for his work. So sit back and relax and follow me as we travel on the History Trail. Well, Joseph, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And so we're here talking about New Jersey during the Civil War. What was New Jersey's role during the Civil War?
Well, New Jersey supplied troops to the Union Army, and it also supplied a good deal of industrial material to the war effort, including clothing, uniforms, weapons, railroad engines. New Jersey was a burgeoning industrial state at the time of the war.
Okay, so we're supplying not only manufactured goods, soldiers as well.
Correct.
Okay. Now, did New Jersey have divided loyalties during the Civil War?
I wouldn't say it was divided loyalty so much as I'd say there was a strong anti-war sentiment in certain areas of the state, mostly in the northern part of the state, ironically. A lot of people are surprised to think that. But the industrial area of the state, Paterson, Newark, the industrialists had connections with selling goods to the South. When the war broke out, the economy was just beginning to recover from the Panic of 1857, and they thought, here we go again, down the tubes, and they were very anti-war. A lot of the workers, because they worked in these factories, were the same.
Okay. Well, how about in South Jersey? There's a heavy Quaker.
Well, right. There's a legend that South Jersey was sympathetic to the Confederacy because it's below the Mason-Dixon line. I always explain to people the Mason-Dixon line is a pre-Revolutionary War boundary line between Maryland and Pennsylvania and Delaware. If you draw a line from Pennsylvania to the Atlantic Ocean, parts of southern New Jersey are under it, but that has nothing to do with politics. There was a strong Quaker influence in southern New Jersey. There were a lot of free black communities in southern New Jersey. And so that area tended to be even abolitionist, which most of the state was not. Even the pro-union parts of the state were not strong abolition areas.
Okay. So how about internal conflicts? I mean, politically, what was happening in the state at that point?
The state was dominated for the most part by the Democratic Party. The Republican Party at the time didn't even call itself the Republican Party. They called themselves the Opposition Party. They managed to elect a governor in 1860, Charles Olden, but Olden was not eager to see war come either, and even the only northern governor to participate in a in a peace conference in early 1861. So that dynamic continued through the war, and the Democrats assumed as the war deepened and people became dissatisfied, not so much with the fact that they were fighting to save the Union, but the fact that it was dragging on. The Democratic Party under Joel Parker, who was the governor that succeeded Olden, took over much of the state. And there was some legislation passed in 1864-5 that was pretty antithetical to the Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay. So how about with Abraham Lincoln? I mean, did New Jerseyans vote for Abraham Lincoln? There's two presidential elections,
Right.
1860 and 1864.
Right. Of course, there were votes for Lincoln. In 1860, due to the way they structured it, he split the electoral vote with Stephen Douglas. In 1864, George McClellan, the former general, who had become a home state person by moving to West Orange after his relief by Lincoln from command, was the Democratic candidate, and he captured all the state's electoral votes in 1864.
Okay. Okay. So once it becomes clear, in essence, that the war is going to drag on, how did New Jersey and see an end to the conflict?
They were pretty much similar to people across the North. As the war deepened and it became obvious it wasn't going to end quickly, things became a lot more serious. Recruiting dropped off, and this was not only the case in New Jersey, it was the case in a lot of places. Actually, the Confederacy goes to a draft in 1862, whereas the Union doesn't really do it until 1863. So you have that kind of war weariness. You have bounties being paid to soldiers to enlist. You have substitutes going for draftees, but there's still a lot of people in the northeastern part of the state making a lot of money out of the war. So.
Okay. So let's talk about the soldiers. How many regiments were formed in New Jersey?
Well, 40 actually. There were some militia regiments as well, but there are 40 regiments. The regiment's about 1,000 men at enlistment.
Okay.
Often when they get to the field in their first battle, they're down to about 600 because of losses from disease and disability. And the average strength of a regiment through the war is maybe 350, 400 men.
Okay.
In the field.
All right. And what battles did they partake in?
They were in all the important battles in the East. Although they didn't actually participate at Bull Run, New Jersey troops were on the field in reserve. They were in all the battles subsequent to that, the famous ones like Chancellorsville and Gettysburg and Antietam. In the West, beginning with Chattanooga in 1863, the New Jersey regiments were represented in the Western armies. There were 3 regiments in Sherman's army that marched to Atlanta and then Savannah at the sea and up through the Carolinas to end the war.
Okay. So walk me through the enlistment for a soldier at the time period. So these regiments that are formed, they're formed in different parts of the state, different counties?
Depending upon the time the regiments were formed. In 1862, they were geographically based by congressional district. Like the 15th New Jersey Infantry is formed up in northwestern New Jersey from Sussex, Warren, Hunterdon, Somerset, Morris counties. But other times, companies are formed locally, and then they merge them together. So it varies according to the time of the war that the troops are being enlisted. Normally, a person will get a commission to raise a company, and he'll become the captain if he raises it. So he enlists these guys. The local town may provide a bounty of, in the beginning, maybe $15 or $20. At the end, $300 and $400. And once the companies come together, they go to a central point where they get put into a regiment. A company is about 100 men. 10 companies make a regiment of 1,000 men. And then there's minimal training, really. There's no training regimen like today in the military. And they train themselves, more or less.
So they trained in New Jersey?
To more or less organized in New Jersey. I mean, they go through the basics, how to march and how to handle your gun. And then they move them off down to Washington, say, for the Eastern armies where they tend to train more. And in the case of the 13th New Jersey, they're formed in Newark in 1862 in August. They are put on a train to go to Washington. They're taken off the train, sent to the Antietam battlefield. Into the Battle of Antietam, they've never loaded their guns prior to this. So they were totally untrained, and they were shot to pieces as a consequence.
So for Middlesex County, let's say, where would be a center?
Yeah, well, in Middlesex County in 1862, a lot of the guys from the 28th Regiment came from Middlesex, and they moved. They went to Camp Vradenburg, which was down in Freehold.
Okay.
Otherwise, later in the war, everybody goes to Trenton.
Okay.
Middlesex County also had, I think they had men in the 14th New Jersey, again, Camp Vredenburg and Freehold in 1862. Later on, it becomes, towards the end, Newark and Trenton are the two locations where they muster them in.
Okay, all right, and then they're shipped off by train or
they shipped off by
steamboat?
train. Yeah,
Okay.
the first guys to go, the militiamen in 1861, who were enlisted for 90 days. They went by the little canal boats and went down the Delaware River to Maryland. Then they got on the train.
So what were the length or the terms of their service?
Militia in 1861 is 90 days. After that, the normal enlistment was 3 years. And in 1864, the Army realized all of these soldiers were going to be getting out of service in the summer of 1864, in the middle of the campaign season, so they offered them extreme bounties to re-enlist.
Okay.
In other words, in January of 64, you take your discharge instead of in June, and you re-enlist for another 3 years, and we'll give you, $300. Now, Essex County may give you $300 too, and you could end up making $700-800, which was almost 2 years' salary for a working man in those days.
So a sizable sum.
Yeah, and these guys, a lot of them figured the war was almost over. They were wrong, and I've read a letter from a man who said that we thought wrong. Yeah.
So, I mean, is that the perception that the war is going to be over quickly?
Among some, yeah. These guys kicked it around in camp, and that's instructive in wanting to know when they think the war's going to be over. After Gettysburg, and then they go into the fall and the winter camp. They don't fight in the winter. It isn't like constant combat until 1864, and then they're in constant combat. But they sat around, they discussed this re-enlistment thing, and we have letters and diaries that say, one guy would say, no, I don't think this is going to end. I want to get out. But then they said, well, you're not going to get out until July anyway. So, of course, some of the guys who re-enlisted were killed, and some of the guys who didn't re-enlist were killed that summer. The summer of 1864 was a horror show.
Well, let's talk about the New Jersey soldier. This is an extremely diverse state.
Yes.
Urban areas, agricultural areas, the population is rather diverse. I mean, is there a New Jersey soldier?
Yes, I would say if you were to typify anybody, he would be probably from a small town or a farm. Even though the state is industrializing rapidly during this period, it's still primarily agricultural. But you get a large ethnic disparity. You have some of the first Italian immigrants that come over, you find in the Union Army from New Jersey. Plenty of Irishmen, Germans, old stock Dutch and English, even some of the few remaining Lenape Indians in the ranks. Yeah.
So are there certain regiments that are predominantly a particular cultural group or ethnic group?
Not in New Jersey. A lot of the Irish from Jersey City went over and joined the Irish regiments from New York. Okay. The famous Irish Brigade under General Marr. You'll find, but a good example of an urban regiment is the 13th New Jersey, the guys who marched in at Antietam. They're recruited from Essex County and Passaic County and Hudson County. And the interesting thing about them is that they have the least number of deaths from disease of almost any regiment in the Union Army because they're from an urban area. And they're exposed to these diseases when they're kids, and they either die or survive. Or again, if they survive, they develop an immunity. Guys from rural areas go in the Army and they catch measles, and they die. During the Civil War.
So what are they equipped with? I mean, weapon-wise?
The average soldier has a muzzle-loading rifle, or it's 58 caliber. Okay. You can load and fire it 3 times a minute. You carry 40 rounds in your cartridge box. You have to load the muzzle, the cartridge down the muzzle, and you put a percussion cap on the back to fire it. That's the cavalry later gets Spencer repeating rifles, lever-action carbines. Okay. So. And the average soldier packs around 60 pounds on his back when he's marching.
So marching with 60 pounds.
Yeah, and that's pretty much remained, I think, about the average from the Roman legions to today. Same as the musket weighs about 9 pounds. World War II M1 Garand weighed about 9 pounds. So all about the same. Yeah.
So the tactics that they're fighting, where they're sort of marching off into battle on the battlefield, aren't the weapons and the accuracy improving?
Well, yes and no. Theoretically, the rifle musket is more accurate than the old smoothbore musket, and it's deadly over a far greater range. but they don't train them how to shoot. And in order to train to shoot this rifle musket accurately at long range, you have to be able to estimate the range, because when the bullet comes out, it's going at such a low velocity, it is a parabola-like trajectory.
Okay.
So if you don't know that target is 300 yards exactly away, you're not going to be able to line your sights up right, and you will probably miss. So they don't teach them how to judge. The British Army goes into great pains to teach men how to estimate distance. They don't even think about doing that in either the Union or the Confederate Army till the war's half done. And then they do a sloppy, haphazard bit of it. In the spring, for example, they'll all come out and they'll put up a big bed sheet at 100 yards and say, everybody shoot at that. Everybody gets 5 rounds. Hey, all right, you hit it. Good enough. That's their marksmanship training. It isn't great. The Southern New Jersey Regiment, the 12th New Jersey, uses a smoothbore musket and has buckshot and a round ball, and it's like a shotgun. And they help repel Pickett's charge on the Cemetery Ridge and at Gettysburg, and their monument has one large sphere and 3 small ones with a buckshot and the balls that they used in the old smoothbore. It's an obsolete kind of gun, but they liked it at close range.
So how did New Jersey troops excel or not on the battlefield?
The 1st New Jersey Brigade has a very solid reputation all through the war. And from the battles in Virginia, and they fight in the Shenandoah Valley in the summer of 1864, I would say they're one of the better brigades in the Union Army. 1st New Jersey Cavalry has a good reputation as well. Some of the later regiments, like the 33rd and the guys that go out west, they get a little rough reputation in the beginning. Guys are deserting from training camp in Newark after they get their bounty money. But once they get out on the front and they weed out the characters, that they turn out to be pretty good.
So how about African Americans? What were their contributions?
Significant. They proportionally, when I did the book on this subject of New Jersey African Americans, there's a larger percentage of them enlisting voluntarily than white New Jerseyans, relevant to their population. And they begin joining the Army when they're allowed to in late 1863, and about more than 3,000 joined the Union Army and Navy. And most of the Army guys are sent to Camp William Penn outside of Philadelphia, where they go through the same kind of a sort of very preliminary basic training. And then all the Jersey regiments fight in Virginia. One regiment in particular, the 22nd United States Colored Infantry, becomes very distinguished. They break the Confederate line in the summer of 1864 at Petersburg. They almost win the war, but they're stopped by the general, who gets nervous. And so they continued. They might have been able to seize the town of Petersburg. They later on distinguished themselves during the siege of Petersburg. After the war is over, they are chosen as one of the units that tries to find John Wilkes Booth, and they are also asked to march in the funeral procession of Abraham Lincoln, which is a great honor. So they were considered a very good regiment. Actually, the last New Jersey soldier to die, veteran of the Civil War in 1946, was an African American out in Allentown, who lived out in Allentown.
Now, were these African Americans from New Jersey? Had any come up from the South?
Most of them are born in New Jersey. There's one instance I tracked of a man who was a servant of a Confederate officer. The Confederate officer is wounded at Gettysburg. He makes sure the guy gets to a hospital, and he says, "See ya." And he comes to New Jersey and works on a farm. When he enlists in a New Jersey regiment. Most of these men, though, they've been around for a long, long time. New Jersey entered a gradual abolition stage in 1805. And there was gradual abolition throughout a lot of black communities in South Jersey. They were sort of irregular outside the bounds of the municipalities, but they were sort of tolerated. And the state was not overly enlightened racially, but these men were pretty much all New Jersey residents all their lives.
So we've been talking about the Army. What about the Navy at the time?
Navy enlistment is harder to track. Adjutant General Stryker, who created this huge 2-volume set in the post-war era of everybody that he could find and document serving from New Jersey, lists the Navy men in there. A lot of them are They will join the Navy in New York, but they're credited to New Jersey, and they put them on a training ship in New York, and then they parcel them out to the fleet. They don't, in other words, they don't go to war in state-identified units. For the most part.
Okay.
Whereas the New Jersey regiments, some New Jerseyans join the regular army, but most of the New Jerseyans who fight in the Civil War are in identified New Jersey regiments, like the 1st New Jersey Infantry, et cetera, et cetera. The Navy guys, not so much. Same with the Marines. There is a New Jerseyan who wins the Medal of Honor as a Marine, and a couple of Navy men as well.
How about New Jersey generals?
Oh, the one that always stands out is Phil Kearny. He's an extremely colorful character. Is involved in all kinds of scandals before the war. He goes over to France to study cavalry tactics, gets himself involved in the war in Italy in 1859, totally against regulations. He has lost an arm at Churubusco in Mexico. He commands the 1st New Jersey Brigade and then a division, and he's killed at the Battle of Chantilly in 1862. Other than that, there's no one I would consider to be really distinguished. There are a couple of other people who rise to the rank of general. A lot of guys, they rain stars down on people, colonels, at the end of the war. They give them brevet generalships. So for the rest of your life, you can be called a general, even though you were never any more than, say, a colonel. And we have a fair amount of those. One would be General Sewell, who I find is a very interesting character. Sewell comes over from Ireland. He goes to work on the Pennsylvania Railroad, laying track, rises to become supervisor, then raises a company for the Civil War, becomes a captain, works his way up to colonel, gets a brevet brigadier generalship, becomes an executive in the Pennsylvania Railroad after the war, becomes a New Jersey National Guard actual general, and then he becomes a U.S. Senator. So he really works his way up through the system. Of course, at the time they called him in the 1890s the Senator of the Pennsylvania Railroads.
Well, there must be some fascinating stories in your research that have come to light. So tell me, what's one particular soldier's story that you found interesting?
One I find that's tragic would be Ellis Hamilton. Hamilton is commissioned to 2nd lieutenant at the age of 16 in the 15th New Jersey Infantry. He's from Camden. As an 18-year-old captain, he's mortally wounded in the wilderness. And he's the youngest commissioned officer in the Union Army. Another would be Lieutenant James Madison Drake from Elizabeth. And he is captured at Drury's Bluff in Virginia in 1864 in May. He's a prisoner of war. They're down in South Carolina, and they're moving him by train with other prisoners from one camp to another. They're going up a hill, and the train slows down. He looks out, and there's no guard in the train. The train's real slow. He just jumps out. And he and another guy make their way back to 800 miles to Union lines. And he escapes. He writes a book about it later called Fast and Loose in Dixie. He gets all the way back to the Union lines. Becomes a prominent character after the war in New Jersey politics and history as well.
How about, many people don't realize about the Southern or the Confederate prisoner camp that was in New Jersey. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, theoretically, I guess it's in Delaware.
Okay.
It's Fort Delaware down in Delaware Bay. And it was a Confederate POW camp, especially after Gettysburg. I think a lot of men were brought there. A lot of them died, as people die in all these POW camps during the war, of disease. They used to bury them on the island, but the ground was too porous. So they started to bury them in New Jersey. So then you have the National Cemetery down there near Fort Mott. And that cemetery is the only national cemetery that I'm aware of in which there are Confederates buried.
So in doing your research, what were some of the resources that you examined to pull all of this information together?
Well, yeah, you start.
You mentioned Stryker.
Yeah, Stryker is very good on that. He's very thorough, and when you go to the State Archives, you can find his original records and how he put this together, which is fascinating. And of course, there are lots of correspondence there. Correspondence to the Adjutant General during the war, correspondence after the war. Letter from a woman in 1866. She said, "My husband never came home. I heard he was discharged down in Alabama, and he married some other woman." And she's writing to the adjutant general and saying, get this bum back here or get me some child support, basically. Yeah. Bigamy was a very common crime, a very common thing, shall we say, in the 19th century, because you could be anybody you wanted. If I go to Pennsylvania, nobody's going to ask me for my driver's license, my Social Security card. I don't have any of that. So at any rate, yeah, those letters and correspondence there, newspapers are all on microfilm. Regimental records, which are in the archives in Trenton. The Alexander Library at Rutgers has a terrific microfilm collection. They also have a lot of letters, including the letters of Lieutenant Hamilton that I mentioned.
Okay.
Army Military History Institute out in Carlisle was another source. Local historical societies. You'd be surprised what you find. Somebody gives their letters of their ancestry to the local historical society. Nobody knows it's there, but you have to go around and check all of these venues.
Okay.
Then you pull it all together.
So official records that are kept by the government would be in some of the larger archives, like the New Jersey Division of Archives and Record Management, and then maybe private letters and diaries.
Yeah.
Those survive at local historical societies.
They do, and they also sometimes find their way to like Rutgers and the archives, because back in the centennial of the Civil War, the Centennial Commission from New Jersey put ads in all the state newspapers and said that if you have any kind of thing you found, or you have something from a relative and you want to preserve, bring it to us, and then they facilitated it going to a repository.
Okay.
That's how Hamilton's letters. Somebody found Hamilton's letters. They were going to throw them out. They were, getting ready to go to the dumpster, and they were preserved because of the committee and given to Rutgers.
Okay. How about graveyards, tombstones?
Yeah, I know a guy who from Union County, and he and another guy, Bob McAvoy, his name is, and he put together a 2-volume set that most of the larger libraries have of every veteran burial in New Jersey. And most of the people killed during the war ended up buried in Virginia and never returned. But the veterans lived, and there's a lot of stories there. You can track these people down. So yeah, there's a lot of information there. In the Black Troops book I did, we used Bob's information, and we traced 1,600 African American soldiers buried in New Jersey, veterans of those regiments, out of the 3,000.
I think I was reading some 40,000 graves, I think, that
yes.
recorded.
Yeah, and there's more now, because since he's been keeping up the database since they did the books.
Okay.
And and he's got it set up so you can find them by regiment, by county, by whatever, by graveyard.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So tell me personally, how did you get interested in the Civil War?
Well, I was always interested in military history. I grew up in Newark, and my old man had been in the Army during the Second World War, and I was interested in military stuff. And I used to go down to the Newark Library, which was and still remains one of the great libraries in the state of New Jersey or anywhere. It was John Cotton Dana was the guy who founded that library. And they had an issue a striker down there. I said, let me look up and see if I found my name in here, because my family on the one side came from Ireland, but on the other side I'd been in New Jersey many, many years. And sure enough, I found a guy. I found 3 of them, actually. One of them, turns out, eventually I found out was my grandfather's cousin, and he was killed in the 15th New Jersey at the Battle of Spotsylvania. But the family didn't follow that stuff. They just let that go. And so I'm the one who dug it out, and that got me an interest in this. Plus, the Civil War centennial was coming up at that time in the 50s, and there was a lot of talk about it. And Bruce Catton wrote his first books, and I read first Civil War book I ever bought was by Mr. Lincoln's Army by Bruce Catton, and it's a great read. I mean, it's not only is it accurate, but it's beautifully written, and that's how it began.
So what is it? Is it the story of the soldier you find interesting?
Yes. I think the soldier. And I always like to find out what happened to them afterwards. I did a history of the 15th New Jersey, which my Captain Hamilton was in, and my grandfather's cousin. And what I did at the end, I found is a bunch of them, and as many as I could. What happened to these people afterwards? You find their pension records, and you find that a lot of things things don't work out. They end up like a lot of veterans of a lot of other wars. One guy ends up a legless street musician up in Patterson, and it's a mix of things. One guy becomes a frontier photographer in Arkansas. Careers that you never would have thought of. So I find that fascinating. What happens to these people afterwards?
Wow. Well, Joseph, thank you very much for coming in and talking about these stories and enlightening us about New Jersey's role during the Civil War.
You're welcome.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode as we spoke with Joseph Bilby about New Jersey during the Civil War. For more information on the history of New Jersey's role during the Civil War, you can visit your local library, or you can pick up a copy of New Jersey Goes to War and New Jersey Civil War Odyssey at njcivilwar.org. And for comments or suggestions about today's episode, you can visit the East Brunswick Television website at ebtv3.org. Thank you for watching, and come along again as we travel on the History Trail.